Sophia Martinez rushed down the bustling corridor of Massachusetts General Hospital, her scrubs still stained with coffee from this morning's mishap. She was already 15 minutes late for her meeting with Dr. Wallace, but Tommy's sobs had made it impossible to leave. The 6-year-old leukemia patient had just endured another painful procedure, and Sophia couldn't bear to abandon him without comfort. "I'll be back soon, champ. Promise I'll bring your favorite pudding," she whispered, adjusting the colorful superhero bandana covering his hairless head. Her pager buzzed again. Dr. Wallace was not known for patience, especially when it came to budget discussions. As she hurried toward the administrative wing, Sophia mentally rehearsed her arguments against further cuts to the pediatric oncology department. The meeting was exactly what she'd feared. Dr. Wallace, with his perpetually fatigued expression, didn't even look up from his spreadsheets when she entered. "Ms. Martinez, I'll be direct. Blackwood Enterprises has reduced their donations by 60% this year. Without that support, we'll have to limit the experimental treatments." Sophia's chest tightened. "But those treatments are saving children like Tommy. His cancer responded when nothing else worked." "I understand your frustration," Wallace sighed, finally meeting her eyes. "But without funding, our hands are tied." "There must be something we can do," Sophia insisted, leaning forward. "These are children's lives, not line items on a spreadsheet. Unless you can convince billionaires to part with more of their money, I'm afraid we're out of options." The meeting ended with no resolution, just the heavy weight of impending disappointment she'd have to deliver to families who had finally found hope. Sophia headed to the cafeteria, desperately needing caffeine before facing the rest of her shift. That's when she noticed him, a man in his early 30s with disheveled brown hair, wearing worn jeans and a faded navy sweater. He was frantically searching his pockets while the cashier and growing line behind him waited impatiently. "I swear I had my wallet when I came in for my appointment," he explained, embarrassment coloring his face. "I must have left it somewhere in the hospital." The cashier, Doris, rolled her eyes. "Sir, either pay or step aside." Sophia approached without thinking. "How much is his lunch, Doris?" $12.75, Doris replied flatly. Sophia pulled out a 20, a significant portion of what remained until her next paycheck, and handed it to Doris. "Keep the change." The man turned, surprise evident in his steel blue eyes. "I can't accept this. Consider it a loan. You can pay me back when you find your wallet," Sophia offered with a tired smile. "Everyone needs help sometimes." "Ethan Blackwood," he said, extending his hand. "Sophia Martinez. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to get back to my patients." As she walked away, Sophia didn't notice how Ethan's gaze lingered, nor could she have guessed that she'd just lent $12.75 to a man worth over $4 billion. That same evening, in his penthouse overlooking the Charles River, Ethan held the receipt from that lunch and the hospital business card with Sophia's full name. His friend Blake Reynolds watched him curiously from the leather sofa, nursing a glass of scotch. "So you just pretended to be poor?" Blake asked incredulously. "I'm investigating where the donation money is going," Ethan explained, carefully tucking the receipt into his wallet. "My father always wanted the foundation to make a real difference, but the numbers don't add up. Something's happening, and I won't discover it by showing up in a Bentley wearing Italian suits." Blake shook his head. "And this nurse? Are you going to tell her the truth?" Ethan looked out at the Boston skyline, city lights twinkling like earthbound stars. "Not yet. For the first time in years, someone treated me like a regular person, with no agenda. It was refreshing." "You're playing with fire, Ethan. Regular people don't like being deceived, even by well-intentioned billionaires." Ethan smiled cryptically. "I'm not deceiving anyone. Just omitting some zeros from my bank account." 3 days later, Sophia found Ethan sitting on a bench in the hospital's therapeutic garden, where she usually ate lunch. He was reading a worn Kurt Vonnegut novel. "Mr. Blackwood? Don't tell me you lost your wallet again," she teased, holding her sandwich and an apple. Ethan smiled, closing his book. "No, but I brought something for you." He extended an envelope. Inside was exactly $12.75. "You really didn't need to come all this way just for this," Sophia said, surprised. "I have follow-up appointments," he explained quickly, "and I wanted to thank you properly. Few strangers would be so kind." The lie came easily. In truth, there was no appointment. Ethan had spent the last few days investigating the hospital's finances, discovering suspicious patterns in resource allocation that began shortly after his cousin Veronica took over part of the Blackwood Foundation's management. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the sandwich she held. During that lunch, Ethan learned more about Sophia than any investigation could reveal. Her love of classical music, her passion for children, the promise she made to her late mother. And each word made it harder to maintain his disguise. "What do you do for work, Ethan?" she finally asked. He hesitated for only a second. "Business consulting. I help identify where money is being wasted." It was partially true. He just didn't mention the company was his. "What a coincidence," Sophia laughed bitterly. "Maybe you could consult for Blackwood Enterprises and convince them not to abandon our patients." Ethan swallowed hard. What exactly is happening with the donations? And so, without realizing it, Sophia began giving Ethan exactly what he was looking for. Details about how money that should reach patients was mysteriously evaporating into bureaucracy and ghost projects. When she needed to return to work, Ethan remained in the garden, making notes in what appeared to be an ordinary notebook, but actually fed into an encrypted security system on his phone. Meanwhile, across town, Veronica Blackwood received an alert on her computer. Someone was accessing old financial files from the foundation. With a swipe of her finger, she deleted digital evidence and made a call. "We have a problem. Someone's investigating. We need to accelerate the process before they discover anything." In the weeks that followed, coincidental meetings between Sophia and Ethan became surprisingly frequent. He appeared at the coffee shop where she bought her morning cappuccino, crossed paths with her at the bookstore near the hospital on weekends, and always had a plausible excuse for being nearby. What began as an investigation was slowly transforming into something deeper. Ethan found himself eagerly planning their encounters with the same care he devoted to corporate strategies. He researched her favorite authors before accidentally running into her at the bookstore and memorized her schedule to ensure their paths would cross. On a particularly cold November afternoon, as Boston was covered with the first snowflakes of the season, Ethan found Sophia leaving the hospital looking devastated. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she clutched her coat tightly around herself against more than just the cold. "Has something happened?" he asked, approaching cautiously. Sophia looked up, momentarily startled before recognition softened her features. "Tommy isn't responding well to treatment," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "We just found out the experimental medication that could help him won't be covered by the assistance program anymore." Ethan felt a knot form in his throat. Tommy was the little boy Sophia often talked about, her favorite patient, the one who drew superheroes for all the staff members. "How much would the complete treatment cost?" he asked, mentally calculating how he could transfer funds without raising suspicions. "Over $200,000, Sophia replied, wiping away a stray tear. "Impossible for a family that can barely make rent." That night, after walking Sophia home, another coincidence he had carefully planned, Ethan made 3 phone calls. The following morning, the hospital received an anonymous donation specifically directed toward the treatment of pediatric patients with resistant leukemia. When Sophia discovered Tommy would receive the medication, her joy was contagious. She called Ethan immediately. "You won't believe it. Someone donated exactly the amount needed for Tommy's treatment and 3 other children in the same situation." "That's incredible," he replied, fighting the urge to reveal the truth. "Seems there are good people out there after all." "A genuine guardian angel," she agreed. "Let's celebrate. There's a small Italian restaurant in North End that I love." Lucia's was a family establishment, far from the Michelin-starred restaurants Ethan frequented. As they savored homemade gnocchi and shared a bottle of red wine, the barrier between them diminished. "You know what intrigues me most about you, Ethan? You seem to be everywhere, but you never really talk about your life." Ethan felt his face warm. "What would you like to know? Where do you live? Do you have family? Why do you seem so interested in a hospital where you supposedly just came for an appointment?" He took a deep breath, mixing truths with careful omissions. "I live near the river. I lost my parents, my father just a few months ago. And as for the hospital, let's say I found something there I wasn't expecting to find." His eyes fixed on hers, and for a moment, Sophia sensed he wasn't talking about the building or the institution. The evening ended with an almost kiss at her apartment door, an approach interrupted by the ring of Ethan's cell phone. It was Blake, with urgent news about the investigation. "We found something, Ethan," The digital signature on the altered documents. It's Veronica's. December arrived, bringing with it the holiday spirit that transformed Boston into a postcard scene. Despite financial difficulties, Sophia always saved part of her salary to buy presents for her patients. This year, however, each child in the pediatric ward received a special, personalized gift, accompanied by cards simply signed, "A friend from the North Pole." Tommy received the complete professional art kit he'd been dreaming of. Lily, the girl who had lost her hair during chemotherapy, received a collection of hand-painted silk scarves. Each gift seemed to intimately know the children's wishes. How could someone know exactly what each one dreamed of? Sophia asked Ethan as they walked through the illuminated Boston Common. Ethan smiled mysteriously. Maybe this North Pole friend has an informant at the hospital. Sophia narrowed her eyes. You know something about this, don't you? Me? I'm just a business consultant who lost his wallet in the right place. But it wasn't just the children receiving gifts. Sophia found on her desk an antique brass microscope, a collector's item she had casually mentioned to Ethan weeks earlier when talking about her passion for science during adolescence. The coincidence was difficult to ignore, as were the small improvements beginning to appear in the hospital. New equipment in the nurse's break room, a state-of-the-art coffee machine, tablets for long-term patients. One particularly busy afternoon, Sophia ran into Dr. Wallace in the corridor. "Ms. Martinez, I wanted to inform you that the board has approved the continuation of the experimental program. It seems Blackwood Enterprises has reconsidered its position regarding donations." Sophia frowned. "That's unexpected." "Yes, quite. Especially considering that Veronica Blackwood herself called to confirm the new contribution. She mentioned something about an internal audit that identified administrative discrepancies." That night, while browsing news on her tablet, Sophia stopped at a photo that made her heart race. It was an image from a charity event, and there was Ethan, not her Ethan of worn sweaters and shy smiles, but an Ethan in an impeccable tuxedo, identified in the caption as Ethan Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, after taking control of the company in place of his late father. Sophia's world seemed to slow down. Each conversation, each coincidence, each improvement at the hospital, everything began to make terrible sense. She grabbed her phone and sent a message. "We need to talk. Tomorrow. It's important." Across town, in the office of Blackwood Towers penthouse, Ethan was receiving a complete report on Veronica's financial activities. Blake showed evidence that she had diverted more than $30 million over the past 2 years. "We have enough proof, Ethan. We can confront her now." Ethan watched the city lights, thinking of Sophia. "Not yet. We need to understand why she did this and where the money went. Something doesn't fit." He paused, looking at his phone where Sophia's message was flashing. "Besides, I have another situation to resolve first." The Boston Public Garden was blanketed in white under the steady snowfall that morning. Sophia waited on a bench near the frozen pond, her hands clutching a coffee that was cooling as quickly as her heart. When Ethan appeared, he was dressed as she'd always seen him: jeans, sweater, simple jacket. Nothing indicated the billionaire from the photo, except perhaps the discreet watch she now recognized as a collector's piece worth more than her annual salary. "Thank you for coming," she began, avoiding looking directly at him. "Ethan Blackwood of Blackwood Enterprises. Or should I call you Mr. Blackwood now?" Ethan paled but didn't deny it. "Sophia, I can explain." "Explain what?" "How you played me for months. How you made me believe you were just an ordinary man, while controlling the donations that determine whether my patients live or die." Her voice trembled, not from cold, but from a toxic mixture of anger and disappointment. "It wasn't like that," he said, trying to touch her hand. She pulled away. "I started investigating irregularities in the foundation's donations. I suspected someone was diverting money that should reach the hospital. And what was I? A convenient source? A pawn in your billionaire detective game." Ethan took a deep breath, the vapor of his breath mingling with the light snow falling. "Initially, yes. You were in the right place to give me information about what was happening at the hospital. But afterward, Sophia, nothing that happened between us was planned. Nothing I felt, what I feel, is a lie. How can I believe you now? Every moment, every conversation, everything was built on a lie." "I didn't lie about who I am, just about what I have," he argued desperately. "Money doesn't define me." Sophia finally met his eyes, her shining with contained tears. Money doesn't define you, Ethan, but honesty does, and you weren't honest. She stood up, leaving the untouched coffee on the bench. The patients thank Blackwood Enterprises for its generous donations, Mr. Blackwood. As for me, I prefer relationships based on truth, not charity disguised as coincidence. As Sophia walked away, Ethan remained motionless, snow accumulating on his shoulders like the weight of his mistakes. That same afternoon, Veronica Blackwood watched the scene from afar, using binoculars from a strategically parked car. Beside her, her assistant was typing notes. The nurse found out, she commented, a satisfied smile on her lips. We need to use her. How? Ethan was always sentimental like his father. If she means something to him, we can get to him through her. Find out everything about Sophia Martinez. And prepare Plan B. If we can't divert more funds, we'll need a scapegoat. 3 weeks passed without contact between Sophia and Ethan. She immersed herself in work, dedicating herself to patients with renewed intensity, as if she could fill the void in her chest with more hours in the ward. Tommy was responding well to treatment, a small light in increasingly dark days. It was during one of her visits to the boys' room that Dr. Wallace called her for a private conversation. Ms. Martinez, we need to discuss some financial irregularities. Irregularities? Funds designated for medications for the pediatric ward were redirected. The records show your electronic signature authorizing the transfers. Sophia's blood ran cold. That's impossible. I never authorized anything like that. Significant deposits were also found in an account under your name. What account? I can barely pay my rent. Wallace seemed genuinely troubled. Sophia, I'm trying to help you, but the board is putting pressure on us. You're suspended until the end of the investigation. In shock, Sophia emptied her locker under the confused gazes of colleagues. In the parking lot, she found her tire flat, another blow on a devastating day. While waiting for the tow truck, a black car stopped beside her. The window lowered to reveal an elegant woman in her early 40s, perfectly groomed hair and eyes that slightly resembled Ethan's. Ms. Martinez? I'm Veronica Blackwood. I believe we have matters to discuss. Against her better judgment, Sophia got into the car. In the luxurious interior, Veronica got straight to the point. My cousin has always been naive. You're just the latest of his distractions. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you do. Ethan approached you to investigate embezzlement at the foundation. What he didn't realize is that I was 3 steps ahead. Veronica smiled, handing over an envelope. Here are copies of documents that incriminate you. Your signature, your data, your offshore account. This is forgery. I never. It doesn't matter. The evidence is compelling, and Ethan is too busy trying to save the company from scandal to care about a nurse. Why are you telling me this? Veronica leaned closer. Because I want you to disappear. Leave Boston. There's $100,000 in this other envelope. Start a new life away from Ethan, or face criminal charges. Sophia left the car without accepting the money, trembling not from fear, but from fury. In her apartment, she tried calling Ethan several times, but all calls went to voicemail. At that same moment, Ethan was facing a crisis at the company. Stocks were plummeting after leaks about financial irregularities, and the board was considering temporarily removing him. It was only when he locked himself in his office that he saw the notifications of missed calls from Sophia. When he finally managed to call back, he found only a voice message. Ethan, I know you don't want to talk to me, but your cousin just offered me money to disappear. She's framing me for the embezzlement. I don't know what to do. Her voice broke at the end, and Ethan felt his world collapse. Blake entered the office with more alarming news. We have a bigger problem. Veronica didn't just divert money. She compromised the research funds for the experimental treatment. If we don't reverse this immediately, several patients will lose access to the medication. Tommy, Ethan murmured, remembering Sophia's little patient. What? Nothing. Prepare the jet. We need to act now. Sophia woke to persistent knocking at her door. It was 5:30 a.m., and she had barely slept in the past 48 hours. When she peered through the peephole, her heart raced. Ethan, go away, she shouted through the door. Sophia, please. Tommy and other children are in danger. I need your help. Those words were enough. She opened the door but maintained her distance, arms crossed defensively over her chest. Ethan looked different, disheveled hair, dark circles under his eyes, stubble covering his jaw. Nothing like the polished executive or even the fake patient from before. Veronica didn't just embezzle money. She compromised the stock of the experimental medication, trying to transfer it to a competing pharmaceutical company before I could expose her. Why? Money, power, and revenge against me for investigating her. The medications she's diverting are the same ones Tommy and 3 other children are using. Sophia felt her blood run cold. The children will lose their treatment? Not if we can stop it. I have a plan, but I need you. She hesitated, recalling all the lies. But then she thought of Tommy, of his smile when he showed her his latest improving test results. What do I need to do? Rain fell mercilessly as they arrived at the hospital. Blake waited in the car, monitoring communications and hacked security cameras. Veronica is sending people to remove the medication today at 7 a.m. We have 90 minutes to document the scheme and replace the real drugs with marked placebos. This is insane, Ethan. If we're caught, we'll be charged with theft, breaking and entering, and probably medical interference. I know. Still want to continue. Their eyes met, and for a moment, all the lies and hurts dissolved in the face of a greater purpose. For Tommy, and for the other children. Using Sophia's badge and emergency access codes provided by a board member allied with Ethan, they entered through the back. While Sophia created a distraction in the main lab, Ethan and Blake accessed the refrigerated storage. The medication is here, whispered Ethan, photographing documents and replacing the vials with identical but harmless ones. They were almost finished when the lights turned on. Veronica stood in the doorway with 2 security guards. I always knew you were foolish, cousin, but I didn't imagine you'd be stupid enough to fall into my trap. She smiled coldly. Security cameras capturing the great Ethan Blackwood stealing medications, accompanied by the nurse already suspected of embezzlement. The press will love this. Why, Veronica? My father trusted you. Your father trusted everyone. He wasted millions on charity when we could have been maximizing profits. When you took over, I thought you'd be different, but you're just like him. Weak, sentimental. You're stealing medications from children with cancer, Sophia intervened, her voice trembling with indignation. Veronica laughed. I'm maximizing assets. Denton Pharmaceuticals will pay 10 times more for this formula on the gray market. What Veronica didn't know was that Blake was transmitting the entire conversation to the company board and authorities. When the security guards moved to restrain Ethan and Sophia, the lights flickered again. Actually, Ms. Blackwood, I believe we have sufficient evidence now. Dr. Wallace entered, accompanied by police officers and the FBI director for Boston, a longtime patient of the hospital and Blake's personal friend. Veronica's face transformed into a mask of fury as handcuffs closed around her wrists. This isn't over, Ethan. You have no idea of the reach of my connections. As she was led away, Sophia ran to verify the original medication stocks, ensuring nothing had been compromised. Amid the chaos, her eyes found Ethan's. There were no more lies between them, just the exhausted relief of a battle won at devastating emotional cost. 3 months later, spring arrived in Boston, bringing renewal. The Blackwood scandal had occupied headlines for weeks, but gradually disappeared from the news. Veronica awaited trial, while Ethan implemented profound changes in the company and foundation. Sophia had been completely exonerated and reinstated at the hospital, now with a promotion to coordinator of the newly expanded pediatric assistance program. Tommy and the other children were responding well to treatment. Small daily miracles that reminded Sophia why she had chosen this profession. She hadn't seen Ethan since the night of Veronica's arrest. He had respected her request for space, communicating only through lawyers to ensure her reputation was restored. Blackwood Enterprises' donations to the hospital more than tripled, but Ethan remained completely absent. On a sunny April afternoon, Sophia was leading a group of children through the newly expanded therapeutic garden. Another anonymous gift everyone knew came from Blackwood. Miss Martinez, called Tommy, now with thin hair growing back. Isn't that the lunch man? Sophia turned, and her heart skipped a beat. Sitting alone on the same bench where they had shared so many lunches, Ethan waited, dressed exactly as on the day they met. Children, let's take a break. 15 minutes to explore the garden, but nobody leaves my sight, understood? As the children dispersed, she approached cautiously. Ethan. Sophia. He smiled timidly. I hope I'm not invading your space. It's a public space. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. So many unspoken words, so many contained emotions. How's Tommy? He finally asked. Very well. The doctors are optimistic. She paused. Thank you for what you did for him. For all of them. Ethan nodded, staring at his own hands. I didn't come here just to check on the patients, Sophia. He took a deep breath. I resigned from the executive presidency of Blackwood Enterprises. What? Sophia's eyes widened. Why? I maintained controlling interest but passed daily management to Blake and a new team of executives who share my father's values. I'm going to dedicate my time to the foundation and to discovering who I am beyond the Blackwood name. Sophia sat beside him, maintaining a safe distance. And who are you beyond the Blackwood name? Ethan finally met her eyes. I'm the man who lost his wallet on the right day. The man who fell in love with a nurse who saw people, not fortunes. The man who, for the first time in his life, felt real when treated like an ordinary person. From his pocket, he pulled a worn wallet, the same one he used in his disguise. I have a problem, he said, opening the empty wallet. It seems I've lost all my money again. Could you lend me some for lunch? Sophia couldn't help but smile at his gesture, despite all the wounds still healing between them. How do I know you'll pay me back this time? I have a better proposal, he replied, closing the wallet. What if I spent the rest of my life paying you back? Not with money or mysterious gifts, but with honesty and everything I am. He extended his hand, leaving the choice to her. Sophia studied that hand, the same one that signed billion-dollar checks, the same one that helped save Tommy, the same one that had lied to her for months. It won't be easy to trust you again, she admitted. I know. I'm not asking you to forget the past. I'm asking for a chance to build something new, something real. Tommy came running over, interrupting the moment. Mr. Ethan, look, my hair is growing back, exclaimed the boy, pointing to the thin blonde strands. I see that, champ, Ethan smiled. Soon you'll have more hair than me. Will you stay for the spring picnic? Tommy asked hopefully. Miss Sophia makes the best sandwiches. Ethan looked at Sophia, the silent question in his eyes. I think we can arrange a place for him, Tommy, she answered softly, if he promises not to lose his wallet again. 6 months later, Massachusetts General Hospital celebrated the inauguration of the expanded pediatric wing, now named Elena Martinez Center, in honor of Sophia's mother. The auditorium was packed, doctors, nurses, patients, their families, and the press. Tommy, now officially in remission, cut the inaugural ribbon alongside Sophia, his cheeks rosy again and full of life. Ethan observed from a distance, letting this be her moment. The past months had been about rebuilding, trust, friendship, and slowly, something deeper. There were no grand gestures or public declarations. Instead, there were honest lunches, long conversations in the hospital garden, visits to patients, and Ethan relearning to live without the weight of fortune as his primary identity. When the time came for his speech, Ethan took the stage under the attentive gaze of the audience. Many of you know the story of Blackwood Enterprises and our long partnership with this hospital. What few know is how one nurse transformed not just this institution, but the very essence of how we conduct our business. His eyes found Sophia's in the front row. A year ago, I was just Lawrence Blackwood's son, trying to honor his legacy. But it was only when I lost my wallet, or pretended to lose it, in this hospital that I discovered the true meaning of that legacy. He paused, allowing himself a small smile at the memory. A nurse lent money so I could buy lunch, not knowing I was one of the richest men in the country. Her act of kindness had nothing to do with my bank account. It was purely human. And that's how I began to see beyond numbers and statistics. The audience was in absolute silence. The Blackwood Foundation is no longer just about financial donations. We're creating medical residency programs, nursing scholarships, and expanding access to experimental treatments. Because I learned that true value lies in people, not bank accounts. At the end of the ceremony, as guests dispersed to the reception, Ethan and Sophia found a moment of privacy in the therapeutic garden, their place. That was a beautiful speech, she said, discreetly holding his hand. I meant every word, he replied. You changed my life, Sophia, and you saved many children's lives. The autumn sun was beginning to set, casting golden hues over them. You know, he began. I never properly repaid that first loan. $12.75, she recalled, laughing. I think we can consider it paid in full with an entire wing named after my mother. Actually, Ethan pulled a small box from his pocket. I was thinking of something different. When he opened the box, there wasn't an extravagant diamond ring as one might expect from a billionaire. Instead, resting on the velvet was a simple intertwined silver ring, elegant without ostentation. Sophia Martinez, you lent me more than money that day. You lent me compassion, humanity, and eventually your heart. Would it be too bold to ask if I could keep it forever? Tears glistened in her eyes as she took his face between her hands. Seems I'm making quite a significant investment, she joked, her voice choked with emotion. I promise the highest possible return, he replied, leaning closer. I accept, she whispered against his lips. But with one condition. Anything. Never pretend to be someone you're not again. Not rich, not poor. Just Ethan. Just Ethan, he agreed. And just Sophia. The rest is just detail. When their lips met, there was no longer a billionaire or a nurse, just two people who had found something much more valuable than money. Across the garden, Tommy watched with a smile, drawing in his new sketchbook what appeared to be a couple of superheroes, a nurse with a microscope and a man holding an empty wallet. In the caption, he wrote in his childish handwriting, "Some loans can't be repaid with money." And they didn't need to be. 6 weeks later, Sophia stood in the new pediatric oncology research lab, reviewing the latest trial results. The data showed promising outcomes for a new treatment protocol that combined immunotherapy with targeted radiation, a project fully funded by the Blackwood Foundation's latest grant. Dr. Chun says we might be able to reduce treatment duration by 30% while increasing effectiveness, she explained to the hospital board members touring the facility. That means less time in hospital beds and more time just being kids. As the board members nodded approvingly, Sophia caught a glimpse of Ethan through the glass wall. He was in the recreation room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a group of children, helping them build elaborate structures with colorful blocks. No designer suit, no expensive watch, just a man in jeans and a sweater, completely present in the moment. Who would have thought that the billionaire CEO would find his greatest joy building toy castles with pediatric patients? Later that evening, as they walked along the Charles River, Ethan pointed out the Blackwood Tower in the distance, its windows gleaming in the sunset. You know, I spent 32 years chasing my father's shadow, trying to be worthy of that building. Now I realize he wasn't great because of the tower or the company. He was great because he never forgot what mattered. Sophia squeezed his hand. And what matters? This, he said simply. Being able to walk by the river with someone who loves you for who you are, not what you own. Being able to help children without press releases or tax write-offs. Just being human. You make it sound so simple. It is, he smiled. The complications come when we forget that money is just a tool, not an identity. As they continued their walk, a young woman approached them, clearly distressed. Excuse me, I'm so sorry to bother you, but my car won't start and my phone is dead. Could I possibly borrow $5 for the subway? Before Ethan could reach for his wallet, Sophia was already pulling out a $10 bill. Take this, she offered with a warm smile. It's enough for the fare and a hot meal. Thank you so much, the woman said, clearly surprised by the generosity. I'll find a way to pay you back. No need, Sophia replied. Just help someone else when you get the chance. As the woman hurried away toward the subway station, Ethan looked at Sophia with a mixture of pride and amusement. You never learn, do you? Still lending money to strangers. Sophia shrugged. You never know. She might be a future senator in disguise. They laughed together, their breath creating small clouds in the cooling evening air. Some patterns didn't need changing. They just needed the right context to become something beautiful. You're marrying a billionaire and still insist on having the ceremony here? Sophia's colleague Rachel asked, adjusting the simple white dress in the small hospital chapel. This is where it all started, Sophia replied, touching the delicate silver pendant Ethan had given her, a microscope charm that matched her engagement ring. The hospital chapel had been transformed with modest floral arrangements. No extravagance, no celebrity guests, no media, just the people who mattered, hospital staff, patients who could attend, and the few friends who had stood by them through everything. Tommy, now officially cancer-free for 8 months, proudly carried the rings on a small cushion he had decorated himself. His artwork skills had blossomed under Ethan's encouragement, and he had become something of a little brother to both of them. Nervous? Dr. Wallace asked, preparing to walk Sophia down the aisle in place of her late father. Not about marrying him, she confessed. Just about the changes coming. The biggest change wasn't the marriage itself, but their decision to expand the Blackwood Foundation's work internationally. Next month, they would travel to El Salvador, her mother's homeland, to establish a pediatric oncology center modeled after the Elena Martinez wing. As the music began, Sophia took a deep breath. The chapel doors opened, and she saw Ethan waiting by the altar. No tuxedo, just a simple dark blue suit and the warm smile that had first caught her attention over a cafeteria tray. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Their vows, written personally, spoke not of wealth or comfort but of honesty, partnership, and service to others. When Ethan slipped the wedding band next to her engagement ring, he whispered, "Best investment I've ever made." The reception was held in the hospital gardens. Ethan had insisted on personal touches rather than hired decorators. Children from the oncology ward had created colorful paper lanterns that hung from the trees, and the catering came from Lucia's, the small Italian restaurant where they'd had their first real date. "Not exactly the society wedding of the year," commented Blake, now Ethan's right hand at the foundation rather than the corporation. "Perfect, isn't it?" Ethan replied, watching Sophia laugh with a group of nurses. Their honeymoon wasn't a lavish trip to private islands or European castles. Instead, they spent 2 weeks in a cabin in the Berkshires, hiking, reading by the fireplace, and finalizing plans for the El Salvador project. On their last evening there, relaxing on the porch and watching the sunset, Sophia broached the subject they'd been circling for weeks. "The board offered me the director of pediatric oncology position," she said, running her fingers along the rim of her wine glass. Ethan studied her face. "That's incredible. I know how much you've wanted this. But the timing with El Salvador. We'll make it work," he assured her. "The foundation doesn't need me physically present for every development. That's why we have a team. I don't want to become one of those couples who only see each other at breakfast," Sophia admitted. "Then we won't," Ethan said simply. "We'll set boundaries. No work after 7 p.m. Weekends are sacred. And we travel together whenever possible." Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder. "When did you become the reasonable one?" "When I married a woman who taught me what actually matters." Returning to Boston meant diving back into their busy lives. Sophia accepted the director position while Ethan restructured the foundation to focus on global access to pediatric care. They purchased a brownstone halfway between the hospital and the foundation offices, comfortable but not ostentatious. True to their promise, they maintained boundaries between work and their personal life. Wednesday nights became their tradition, cooking dinner together and talking about everything except work. Their small rooftop garden became their sanctuary, where Ethan discovered an unexpected talent for growing vegetables. 6 months into their marriage, as they prepared for their first trip to El Salvador, Sophia received unexpected news from her doctor. "I don't know how this changes our plans," she said that evening, handing Ethan the ultrasound image. He stared at the small bean-shaped shadow, speechless for perhaps the first time since she'd known him. "It changes everything," he finally said, voice thick with emotion. "And nothing that matters." They adjusted their plans, but didn't cancel them. The El Salvador Center would still open, though Sophia would remain in a consulting role rather than hands-on for the first year. Ethan reorganized the foundation's structure to allow him more flexibility. 3 months later, they stood together at the opening ceremony of the Centro Elena Martinez in San Salvador. Sophia, beginning to show beneath her loose dress, translated Ethan's speech for the local dignitaries and families. "My wife taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in lives improved," Ethan told the crowd. "This center isn't charity. It's an investment in our shared humanity." That night in their hotel room, Sophia felt the baby move for the first time. She placed Ethan's hand on her belly, watching his face transform with wonder as he felt the slight flutter. "Boy or girl, this child will never know the burden of wealth," Ethan promised quietly. "They'll know its responsibility and privilege, but never its weight." "Like their father," Sophia murmured. "A better version," he corrected. "One who never needs to lose his wallet to find his heart." As they fell asleep, Sophia thought about the long journey from that first lunch to this moment. The greatest surprise wasn't that Ethan had been a billionaire. It was that beneath the wealth and deception had been exactly the man she'd first seen. Someone kind, searching, and ultimately human. Some investments, it turned out, paid dividends in ways no financial advisor could ever calculate. 5 years passed like the turning pages of a well-loved book. The Blackwood Martinez household had grown to include not just their daughter Elena, now 4, but also their 2-year-old son Michael, named after Sophia's father. Their brownstone had become a place where billion-dollar decisions and finger-painting happened in adjacent rooms. Ethan had transformed the 3rd floor into foundation headquarters, allowing him to balance work with family life. Sophia continued her role at the hospital, having returned to part-time clinical work alongside her administrative duties. "Daddy, look," Elena exclaimed one morning, pointing to the newspaper Ethan was reading at breakfast. "That's you." The financial section featured Ethan's photo with the headline, "Blackwood Heir Returns to Corporate Helm Amid Healthcare Expansion." Sophia raised an eyebrow as she packed Elena's lunch. "Something you forgot to mention?" Ethan sighed, folding the paper. "The board called an emergency meeting yesterday. Blake needs to step back for health reasons. They want me to return temporarily. And you said that I'd discuss it with my wife." They had built their marriage on this foundation, major decisions made together, honest communication, no surprises. "What does your gut tell you?" Sophia asked, handing him a cup of coffee. "That the foundation is more important, but the company affects more lives globally." He rubbed his temples. "And that I don't want to become my father, missing bedtimes for board meetings." That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat on their rooftop garden discussing options. Unlike their early days, Ethan no longer carried the burden of the Blackwood legacy alone. "What if we restructure both?" Sophia suggested. "Merge the foundation more deeply with the corporation. Make social impact integral to the business model instead of an afterthought." Ethan considered this. It would require convincing shareholders that profitability and purpose aren't mutually exclusive. "If anyone can make that case, it's you." The transition wasn't seamless. Over the next 6 months, Ethan split his time between corporate offices and home, while Sophia adjusted her hospital schedule to ensure one of them was always with the children. They turned down the offer to move back to the penthouse, preferring their modest brownstone and the normalcy it provided their family. The corporate integration of the foundation's mission faced resistance from traditional board members. During one particularly contentious meeting, Ethan found himself defending the strategy to skeptical executives. "Gentlemen, 15 years ago, Blackwood Enterprises was just another faceless corporation. Today, our healthcare initiatives in 12 countries have distinguished us from competitors and attracted talent that money alone couldn't buy." He pulled up slides showing the El Salvador Center, now serving over 3,000 children annually. "These aren't charity projects. They're investments in markets we previously overlooked. They're research hubs developing treatments our pharmaceutical division can scale. They're training grounds for medical professionals who become our strongest advocates." As the new model took shape, Sophia faced her own challenges at the hospital. The board proposed naming her chief medical officer, a position that would require more hours just as Ethan was stretched thin. "I can't ask you to put your career on hold again," Ethan said when she shared the news. "We'll hire more household help if needed." Sophia shook her head. "That's not the point. We promised each other and the children that we wouldn't outsource parenting." They found middle ground, as they always did. Sophia accepted the position with modified terms: virtual attendance for some meetings, a dedicated family day each week, and a satellite office at the Blackwood Pediatric Wing to minimize commute time. Their balancing act became a case study at Harvard Business School, the Blackwood Martinez model, integrating family, philanthropy, and corporate leadership. Neither found it amusing when students analyzed their life choices as strategic decisions, but both recognized the value in normalizing work-family integration at executive levels. Tommy, now 14 and a regular fixture at their Sunday dinners, provided perspective they sometimes needed. "You know what's cool about you guys?" he said one evening while helping Elena with her science project. "Most rich people I see on TV just buy stuff. You build stuff." That December marked the 10th anniversary of their first meeting. To celebrate, Ethan arranged for them to serve lunch at the hospital cafeteria, wearing the same style of clothes they'd worn that fateful day. Dr. Wallace, now retired but present for the occasion, chuckled at the spectacle of a billionaire in faded jeans dishing out meatloaf. "If anyone had told me 10 years ago where that $12 would lead," he commented to Sophia, "I'd have called them delusional." Later that night, after the children's bedtime stories, Ethan presented Sophia with a small wooden box. Inside lay a cafeteria receipt, laminated and preserved, the original from their first meeting, which he had secretly kept all these years. "My best investment," he said simply. Sophia traced the faded print with her finger. "Most investments depreciate over time. Not this one." Ethan took her hand. "This one keeps paying dividends I never knew existed." As Boston slept under a gentle snowfall, they sat by the fireplace planning their next decade. New centers in Africa, clinical trials for treatments they'd helped develop, college funds for children like Tommy. Some loans could never be repaid with money, but a life well lived, shared, and given in service to others. That was a currency neither of them had known existed until a wallet was lost and a lunch was purchased on a day that changed everything. The Boston Children's Research Gala was the premier fundraising event of the year, bringing together medical pioneers, corporate donors, and survivors of childhood diseases. This year marked the 15th anniversary of the Elena Martinez Center, and 16-year-old Tommy had been selected as the keynote speaker. Backstage, Sophia adjusted Tommy's tie, marveling at how the once frail boy had grown into a confident young man. His artwork now graced the walls of pediatric centers across 3 continents, vibrant superhero murals that gave courage to children fighting battles similar to his own. "Nervous?" she asked, smoothing his jacket lapels. "Terrified," Tommy admitted. "What if I mess up in front of all those fancy people? Then they'll know you're human," Ethan replied, joining them. "And that's exactly why they'll listen." From their reserved table, Sophia and Ethan watched as Tommy took the stage. Their children, Elena, now 9, and Michael, 7, sat beside them, unusually quiet in their formal attire, sensing the importance of the moment. "I don't remember much about having cancer," Tommy began, his voice steadier than expected. "But I remember the day Miss Sophia borrowed lunch money for a stranger. I remember drawing superheroes in my hospital bed. And I remember the day Mr. Ethan helped me escape the ward to see snow falling in the garden when I was too sick to walk." He paused, making eye contact with Sophia and Ethan. "What I learned from them wasn't about medicine or money. It was that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create ripples that change everything. Today, I'm cancer-free. Tomorrow, I start my internship at the Blackwood Foundation. And someday, I hope to create my own ripples." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Elena tugged at her mother's sleeve, whispering loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Is Tommy our brother now?" "Family comes in many forms," Sophia answered, squeezing her daughter's hand while wiping away tears with the other. After the gala, at their traditional late-night debriefing in their kitchen, Ethan shared unexpected news. "The board has approved my transition plan. By this time next year, I'll be fully removed from day-to-day operations." Sophia set down her tea. "You're actually going through with it? Stepping down completely?" 50 is approaching faster than I'd like to admit," he smiled ruefully. "I want the next decade to focus on what we're building, not just what we're maintaining." The transition plan had been years in the making, gradually shifting Blackwood Enterprises toward employee ownership while maintaining the family's guidance through the foundation. Unlike his father, Ethan had no intention of working until his final days. "The children will still have more financial security than most," he continued, "but they'll earn their own way. The bulk of the wealth goes to the Foundation Trust." This had been their shared vision since Elena's birth, providing their children with opportunities and education, but not the burden of excessive wealth or expectation. "Speaking of the children," Sophia said, "Elena asked me again about becoming a doctor. She has your healing hands," Ethan nodded, "and your stubborn determination. And Michael wants to follow Tommy into art therapy. Not exactly the traditional Blackwood heir career path." Ethan chuckled. "My father would say we've failed to prepare them for corporate leadership. And what would you say? That we've succeeded in preparing them for meaningful lives." Summer brought changes to the Blackwood Martinez household. Tommy moved into their guest apartment to begin his foundation internship. Elena attended a medical science camp at Johns Hopkins. Michael filled the house with increasingly sophisticated artwork. On a rare quiet evening, Sophia and Ethan walked through Boston Common, retracing the path where they'd had their painful confrontation years before. The memory had lost its sting, becoming simply another chapter in their shared story. "Do you ever miss it?" Sophia asked as they passed the bench where she'd left him in the snow. The corporate power, the boardroom battles, the ability to make billion-dollar decisions. Ethan considered this. "I miss the adrenaline sometimes. The challenge. But not the person I was becoming." Which was? Someone who measured everything by metrics and margins. Someone who might have lost his humanity in spreadsheets if not for a nurse with $12 to spare. They continued walking until they reached the small coffee shop where they'd had countless conversations during their early days. It had changed ownership twice, but retained its character. The same worn wooden tables, the same oversized mugs. As they settled into their usual corner table, a young medical student approached them hesitantly. "Dr. Martinez? Mr. Blackwood? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm one of the Elena Martinez Fellows at the hospital. I just wanted to thank you both. The program changed my life." After the student left, Ethan reached for Sophia's hand across the table. "You know what amazes me most after all these years?" "What's that?" "How much more we've received than we've ever given." Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Sophia found a small package on her pillow, a velvet box containing a charm bracelet. Each charm represented a milestone in their journey. A cafeteria tray, a microscope, a hospital building, a baby booty, the El Salvador flag. "For our anniversary," Ethan explained. 15 years since you took a chance on a stranger with an empty wallet." Sophia fastened it around her wrist, the charms catching the soft bedroom light. "Best $12.75 I ever spent." "I'm still paying you back," he murmured, pulling her close. "With interest," she agreed, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady heartbeat that had become her home. Outside their window, Boston continued its eternal rhythm, unaware that a simple act of kindness in a hospital cafeteria had created ripples that would touch thousands of lives across continents. Some debts could never be fully repaid, and some investments yielded returns beyond calculation. 20 years after that fateful cafeteria encounter, Sophia and Ethan faced a crisis that threatened to unravel their life's work. The global economic downturn had devastated healthcare funding worldwide, jeopardizing the network of pediatric centers they had established across 4 continents. Sophia paced their home office, analyzing spreadsheets showing increasingly alarming projections. Outside, autumn rain pelted against the windows of their brownstone, matching her somber mood. "The El Salvador Center will run out of operating funds in 3 months, she said, pointing to the highlighted figures. Kenya and Vietnam shortly after. And the new facility in Bangladesh may never open at all. Ethan studied the data with a grim expression. At 60, retirement had given him more time with grandchildren and less with corporate crises, a trade he'd never regretted until now. The lines on his face had deepened, his hair now silver, but his eyes remained as focused as when he'd built his empire. "We could liquidate some personal assets," he suggested. "The vacation property in Maine, my father's art collection, the investment portfolio we set aside for ourselves." "That's a temporary solution," Sophia replied, the fine lines around her eyes deepening as she frowned. At 55, she had recently stepped back from clinical practice to focus on research and administration, her dark hair now streaked with distinguished gray. "And it doesn't address the systemic problem. Even with our personal assets, we'd only extend operations for a year, maybe 2. The doorbell interrupted their strategizing. Elena, now 24 and halfway through medical school at Johns Hopkins, arrived with her fiancé James and unexpected news. "I'm deferring my next semester," she announced over dinner, her determined expression mirroring her mother's. "The foundation needs all hands on deck, and I have skills that can help." Ethan and Sophia exchanged glances. They had deliberately avoided pressuring their children to follow their paths, wanting them to find their own way. "Your education comes first," Ethan began, setting down his fork. "We've always been clear about that." "Dad," Elena interrupted, leaning forward with intensity. "You and Mom have always taught us that people matter more than careers or credentials. I can finish medical school later. Right now, children need the foundation centers to survive." "Michael," who had flown in from California where he directed art therapy programs, added his perspective. Now 22, he had his father's quiet charisma, but his mother's compassionate eyes. I've been talking with Tommy. We have an idea that might help. Tommy, now 31 and the foundation's creative director, had been working with Michael on digital outreach campaigns that shared survivor stories. His own experience as a childhood cancer survivor had shaped his life's direction, and he'd become like an older brother to the Blackwood Martinez children. Social impact investments, Michael explained, pulling up a presentation on his tablet. Instead of traditional donations or liquidating assets, we structure investment opportunities with modest financial returns coupled with measurable social outcomes. The family spent the weekend developing a strategy that went against conventional crisis management. Instead of contracting during the economic downturn, they would expand, but with a radical new approach to funding. Sophia reached out to her extensive network of medical researchers and administrators built over decades in the field. Ethan contacted former business associates who respected his vision even after his departure from corporate leadership. The children mobilized their generation's resources and technological skills. Within weeks, they launched the Healing Futures Fund, a hybrid investment vehicle that allowed participants to support pediatric healthcare while receiving modest returns tied to measurable outcomes like survival rates, treatment innovations, and healthcare worker training programs. The launch event at Massachusetts General Hospital, where it all began, brought together an unlikely coalition: venture capitalists, medical professionals, tech entrepreneurs, and former patients from around the world. Tommy, now married with a daughter of his own named Hope, introduced the keynote speakers, Sophia and Ethan. His voice had gained confidence over the years, but his gratitude remained unchanged. When I was 6 years old, fighting for my life in this hospital, 2 people showed me that kindness and determination can overcome seemingly impossible odds, he said. Today, they're showing us again that creativity and courage can find a path forward when traditional approaches fail. Standing at the podium together, they looked out at the faces representing 20 years of their shared mission. Some, like Tommy, were living testaments to the power of accessible healthcare. Others were newer to their circle, but equally committed. 20 years ago, Sophia began, her voice steady despite her emotion. A simple act of kindness in this very hospital sparked a journey none of us could have predicted. Today, Ethan continued, we face challenges that seem insurmountable. Economic contraction, funding cuts, political instability in regions where children desperately need care. But we've learned something important over these decades, Sophia added. Crises don't necessarily require retreat. Sometimes they demand creative advance. The Healing Futures Fund exceeded its initial goals within months, securing operational funding for the threatened centers while pioneering a model that attracted attention from healthcare systems worldwide. What began as a crisis response became a revolution in medical philanthropy. 6 months later, Sophia and Ethan walked through the newly secured El Salvador Center, now named for both Sophia's parents, the Elena and Michael Martinez Pediatric Oncology Center. Children played in the recovery garden, their laughter a counterpoint to the serious work happening inside. We almost lost this place, Sophia said quietly as they watched children receiving treatment in the modern facility. I don't think I realized how much it means to me until it was threatened. It's your homeland's connection to your life's work, Ethan observed, his arm around her shoulders. Of course it matters deeply. A young doctor approached them, Dr. Rosales, one of the first scholarship recipients they had funded 15 years earlier, now the center's clinical director. Dr. Martinez, Mr. Blackwood, we received the new protocol approvals today. We can begin the clinical trials next week. The trials, testing a treatment approach that Sophia had helped develop, represented a potential breakthrough for children with limited access to traditional cancer therapies. If successful, it would make cutting-edge treatment possible even in resource-limited settings. That evening, in their modest hotel suite, they received a video call from Elena from Boston. Her face appeared tired but excited. The first round of Healing Futures investments is fully subscribed, she reported, and the model is being adapted for other healthcare sectors. Michael and Tommy are fielding calls from organizations around the world who want to replicate it. After the call, Ethan stepped onto their small balcony overlooking San Salvador, the city lights beginning to twinkle as dusk fell. Sophia joined him, slipping her hand into his, a gesture unchanged by 20 years. Our children found the solution we couldn't see, she said. They're carrying this forward in ways we never imagined. They had better teachers than I did, Ethan replied. My father showed me how to build wealth. You showed me, showed all of us, how to use it meaningfully. Sophia leaned against his shoulder, watching the city lights emerge as night settled over the capital. Remember when all of this began with $12.75? Best return on investment in financial history, he quipped, the familiar joke now a comfortable ritual between them. It wasn't the money, she corrected gently. It was the recognition of another human being in need. Everything else followed from that moment. As night fell over San Salvador, they remained on the balcony, two people who had discovered that the greatest wealth comes not from what you accumulate, but from what you're willing to share when it matters most.